Ancient of Days. Please be seated.
Go ahead and grab your Bibles. Turn over to Mark 14. Mark 14. We're going to be there in a few minutes as we get going here. Good to see everyone. Hopefully you got one of the handouts that's out on the Welcome Center. We are continuing our journey here of Mark 14. This is a three-part series of all the parts of Mark, but we're looking at 14, 15, and 16 over this week and the last 2 weeks. And so everyone's very attentive. I appreciate that. Lucas is staring me down as we speak. And so, now he's looking at the phone. And so yesterday, well, here we go. Yesterday was the start of spring. Yes, it was. Wasn't it a glorious thing? We're one day into spring, and yay. And obviously, the sun is starting to make things a little warmer. Sheila and I were able to take a walk. Probably one of the things you don't want to hear about this morning is death, gloom, and destruction, and suffering, and then the death, burial, and resurrection, right? Maybe, maybe not, but it's where we're at in Mark. Plus, this is a very important lesson for us. It's like wherever you are in life, we need to hear about this Jesus. And so I'm trending maybe a little bit more in the fall of life, certainly not winter, but fall. I know it comes as a shock to you. All of us need a little bit of spring probably, right? Children, their joy, their growth, awesome stuff. There's summer, of course, young adults, marriage, rebirth, the blooming of the flowers, all that great stuff. But then there's fall, and you just start noticing that you can't quite do things as fast as you used to do, and all of the things that go with that. And then, of course, comes winter. And winter, winter is winter, isn't it? And as we've experienced even last week, it can come in all of its stuff, right? Maybe you're getting excited, though, about spring. Starting the garden, softball season, drying off of the golf course, right? The spring breaks that are occurring right now. The wind in your face when you're riding your bike, whatever it might be. Eating out in the backyard, getting to walk without getting frostbite, whatever it is, right? There's hundreds of reasons why we like spring and all the expectations that go with it. So why would we want to look at the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus? Well, not only is it in the text, but if you are following along and if you happen to be taking notes, I actually have blanks in your handout for this. And this is, I think, something we have to write down. You and I need more than a springtime Christ. We just really do. We need more than the kind of Christ that's like, and I think the older we get, the more mature we get, we start figuring this out. That this yes that rises up in our hearts, that I want more than a springtime Jesus. You know, springtime doesn't last, right? It goes on into summer. And if you have a springtime Christ, you will feel pretty destitute when winter's night of suffering sets in. And it may happen tomorrow, at the beginning of your spring, or at the end of your life. If I give you every Sunday, and if Devin gets up here and Daryl gets up here, or Jimmy gets up here, and we all preach these lessons, if all of us just over and over give you a chipper, happy-go-lucky, whistling, buddy, chum, pal kind of Christ, who cheers you on, who's like, I am here to encourage you, you can do it. And that's a little bit of truth, but it's not the whole truth. And a brighter, chippier kind of Sunday morning services are good. But I think we get a lot of encouragement already from our own selves, don't we? We already get a lot of this, like, okay, it all can work out for our good, right? That's true, it can, and it does. But I think the upbeat, sunny, successful, comfortable, leisurely, sporty, smiley, fun people are less than we think. Right? I think there's less times in our lives than we think that's like that. And the more of the winter time where Jesus comes into the world and he has to die on a cross. So I'm not going to give you any springtime stuff as much as I'm going to give you some encouragement here, how to survive and thrive in the winter times of your life. That's our lesson this morning. Not many people have this culture, in our culture, have this goal for you, though, that make it through the winter, right? Because winter's coming. That's the reality. And that's number 2 statement. Winter is coming for everyone. Sooner or later, right? There are health winters. There's marriage winters. There's parenting winters. There's vocational winters. And there's the one final winter of death. And in those winters, I promise you, you don't want a chipper, happy-go-lucky chum or pal to kind of like say, oh, God will remove all that in just a few days. Don't worry, hold on. You should be, you just not prayed enough. Pray that the Lord will take it away, and He will. That kind of prosperity type gospel thing. You will want the Christ of Mark 12 through 16. You'll want a Christ who is a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. You will want church members who perhaps are better at weeping than at laughing with you. You'll want hope, not cheery, sunny, springy kind of springtime hope. You'll want something better than that. And the hope of Mark 14 is solid, unshakable, everlasting, God-guaranteed kind of hope in the face of a pretty bleak and dark place. That's the Jesus we're confronted with. So how does He do it? Who is He? How can He go through this? What is He like? What do we learn about Him as He experiences the death, burial, and resurrection? So not so much what does He do for us, though that's important. And we're going to keep doing that forever, aren't we? Every single Sunday we talk about this, even at the communion, don't we? We want to know, okay, what is He doing for us? And what does this mean for us? But we also want to learn, what does this mean for Jesus? What was He like when He went through this? What is an indication of how He wants us to, and what's the indications of how He wants us to respond to that? So that's our lesson. Another way of saying it, and that's just the little thing I just said to you. It's like you'll want solid, unshakable, everlasting, God-guaranteed hope. You won't want just that springtime blissfulness, right? We want more than that. These chapters give us that. Mark 14, 15, and 16. It's a unit. It happens to coincide with 3 important verses in the Old Testament. It's a part of the suffering servant framework of Isaiah 53. So Isaiah 53, 7, 8, and 9 go hand in hand with Mark 14, 15, and 16 because it's the death, burial, resurrection of Jesus, right? It's leading up to His death, and then His burial and resurrection. And so that's 7, 8, 9. And it kind of goes like this, doesn't it? 3 chapters, they all framed within the context of one essential important event in the Old Testament. What was that event that Mark's going to use? Because everybody in the Roman Empire just about knew this event. Certainly in Palestine and Jerusalem and in that area, the Romans themselves knew about this event. They knew the Passover lamb concept. And so it's all framed within this Passover lamb meal. And who is the Passover lamb? And what do we learn about Jesus when we equate Him with the Passover lamb? And so that's where we're going with this. Another way of saying it, though, is like this. Chapter 14 is about the lamb being led to the slaughter. Not slaughtered yet, but being led to the slaughter. Chapter 15 is the death of the lamb. Chapter 16 is the risen lamb. And guess what's happening in 2 weeks? But anyway, the risen lamb is chapter 16. And so now I want you to go to another place, and that's Isaiah 53, 7, 8, and 9. I've got it on the board. This is just verse 7. But remember, 7, 8, 9 correlates to 14, 15, and 16. This morning, we're looking at one verse only, verse 7. And it goes like this. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet He did not open His mouth. Like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, and like a sheep that is silent before its shearers, yet He did not open His mouth. There's a theme there. And there's also some good stuff about this lamb and what we learn about Him. So we're going to go back to Mark 14, and we'll stay in Mark 14, but this is what we want to hold on to. Just a few simple words. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet He didn't open His mouth. He was like a lamb led to a slaughter. He was like a sheep that is silent before his shearers. yet he did not open his mouth. So that's our verse. Now we're going to put that as a template onto chapter 14 and see if we can't learn a little bit more about Jesus and what it means to have this kind of unshakable hope that Jesus had during this time period. And another way of saying it, and just because I like saying it in different ways, and one of these perhaps will hit you better than another, I kind of also took 7, 8, and 9 and just kind of reversed it out of Isaiah instead of Mark, and you could read it like this. There's the suffering of the servant and his response to suffering. That's chapter 14. Or the death of the servant, and then the response of the people around him to his death. That's verse 8, but it's also Mark 15. Or you could say there's Mark 16, or verse 9. Finally, the burial of the servant and its strange and hopeful twist that's found in verse 9. He should have been buried with the wicked and the poor, but he was buried in the rich man's tomb. There's a twist there that we'll talk about when we get to Mark 16. Now to our text, Mark 14, 12 through 31. And of course, it starts with this framework, right? On the first day of unleavened bread, when the Passover lamb was being sacrificed, his disciples said to him, "Where do you want us to go and prepare for you to eat the Passover?" Don't you love those verses that read like that? Then it always it's so intriguing. It's like Mark says on the first day of unleavened bread, when the Passover lamb was being sacrificed. And you're like, which Passover lamb is he talking about? Is he talking about the Passover lamb they're about to kill at the temple? Or is he talking about the Passover lamb that's about to die on the cross? Because he's writing this years later. And so you just know it's like, oh, those little messages hidden in there. It's like both, right? They're preparing for both. Both the one that dies on the cross and the one that's killed at the temple. But anyway, as well as the one that they're going to eat of or partake of here in this particular chapter. And so, verse 13, he sent 2 of his disciples, "Go into the city, you'll find a man carrying a pitcher of water." And they go and they find, and wherever he enters, they follow him. And then they say to the owner of the house, "Where's my guest room in which I may eat the Passover with my disciples?" And he'll show you a large upper room. And get it ready and prepare for us the Passover meal. And they go, and it's the way they said. Verse 17, when evening they came, they reclined at the table. And Jesus said, of course, these words that we often hear at the communion time. "I say to you that one of you will betray me." Well, we don't usually talk about that one at communion time. "One who is eating with me." And they begin to be grieved and to say to each other, "I'm not going to betray you. You going to betray? I'm not going to betray him. None of us are going to betray you, Jesus." And of course he said to them, "It is one of the 12 who will dip with me in the bowl. For the Son of Man is to go. But woe to the man who betrays me. It would have been better for him never to have been born." They kept eating. He took some bread. He gave a blessing. He broke it. He gave it to him. Said, "Take, eat. This is my body." And then he took a cup. He gave thanks. He gave it to them. They all drank from it. And then, of course, he said, "This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many. I say to you, I shall never again drink of the fruit of the vine until the day when I drink it new in the kingdom of God." They sang a hymn. They went out to the Mount of Olives. And Jesus said to them, "Matter of fact, you'll all fall away, every single one of you." Verse 28. Verse 29, but Peter said, "Even though all may fall away, I won't fall away." And Jesus, paraphrasing the rest of it, says, "You fall away, you'll be about the very first one to do so. And you're going to do it 3 times. Don't even think it." Peter, of course, kept saying, I won't, I will never deny you." They go to a place called Gethsemane. He said, "Sit here until I've prayed." They fall asleep. He says, "Can't you pray? Can't you be ready?" They fall asleep. It's the story of Mark 14. What do we get from this? What do we learn about Jesus? What do we learn about being led by the Lamb? What does he want us to see in all of this? Here we go. This is what I think Jesus is trying to do for us in this particular chapter. I think, first of all, he's trying to tell us that in this bleak time period, in this difficult time period, that Jesus is going to have to suffer. This is what the Lamb's going to have to go through. And here's what it's going to be like. And so just this initial, and so I've got 4 of them because it's Isaiah 53 verse 7. It's like, here's the Lamb's experience. And what I learned from him going through this gives us an indication of who he is. So I look at these 4 experiences and I think, okay, what did he do during all of that? That's how I get to this place of who is Jesus. So first, let's just list them. He's oppressed. That's the word when you think of the Egyptians when they took the straw away from the Israelites making bricks. It's like the taskmaster hurting the slave. He's oppressing them. He's pressing down upon them. Jesus is being pressed down at this point. None of the this is like, it's like he's purposefully done it, of course. But he has gone from Galilee, from Nazareth, from the Sea of Galilee, and now he's entering into the enemy's camp. It's like everything is closing in there in Jerusalem. He's being oppressed. He's being afflicted. And there's that humiliation, the ridicule, the shame, the affliction that they bring upon him. He's being treated with contempt. He's been brought down low. They force it down his throat these last few days. Certainly of this last week of his life. And then, of course, Isaiah will say it just very plainly, number 3. He's being led to the slaughter. And, of course, that doesn't happen until Mark 15. But we're not in Mark 15 yet. We're still in Mark 14, where there is this being led to the slaughter. And it's a terrifying thing. It's like he knows what's at the end of the tunnel. There's no bright light and rescue. There's no, it'll all get better. Just keep praying, Jesus, and everything will work out for good. It's like he's going to the cross. It's like there's none of this like, oh, it's okay. God will remove it if you'll just be faithful enough. It's, nope, he knows the end. It's death. It's the cross. So he knows it. And so there's not going to be any more spring in Jesus' life. This is as good as it gets when he has to tell his disciples, oh, by the way, you're all going to betray me. And it goes downhill from there. Off the cliff, right? 4th, he, of course, will be sheared. It's an interesting concept, being sheared. Because if we're not careful, you'll think of it only in like sheep thought. Don't think about sheep now. Think about Jesus. What is he going to be sheared of? Well, he's certainly stripped of his clothes. But more likely, Isaiah is talking about he's going to be stripped of his friends, right? His honor, his divine protection, his just all of that's going to be stripped away from him. Jesus tells them, remember what he says here? He says, you will all, every last one of you, deny me. It's like I'm going to be sheared completely of anything and everything, from family, from friends, from honor, from my worldly possessions, whatever meager things he had. And so how does he respond to these 4 words? How does he respond to oppression and affliction and slaughter and being sheared? That's where I learn about Jesus. And it's a very simple lesson, isn't it? How does he respond? You know the answer already, don't you? Because he said it 3 times in Isaiah 53, verse 7. And so we can't help but see it. We see it over and over. We'll see it all next week in Mark 15. We see it all throughout the rest of 14. He'll never respond a different way, except for this weird little thing about him being the Son of God with Pilate. Otherwise, he never responds to these 4 things except in one way, and that's through complete silence every single time. He'll never open his mouth. Like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, like a sheep that is silent before it shears, so he did not open his mouth. 3 times there in verse 7 he'll do it. And over in the text. His response is an amazing amount of silence. It's so amazing that Pilate and Herod both say what? What is wrong with this person? No one does this. No one does not say something, give some justification, talk some way about how it's somebody else's fault or extenuating circumstances or whatever it might be. And yet Jesus will have none of it. So this is what you and I need. This is the Jesus you and I need. as we contemplate, why did he need to be silent? And we'll say, if we're not careful, well, he just needed to fulfill Old Testament passages that said he was going to be silent, like Isaiah 53, verse 7. But no, that's not what he was silent. He wasn't going, I'm going to fulfill Isaiah 53, 7, so now I'm going to just not say anything. I'd really like to, but I won't. No, he's giving us himself here. This is who Jesus is. God is not the God who calls 10,000 angels down and destroys the Romans. That's not who he is. He's the one who does nothing. So I've got to understand that. It's like, what is Jesus trying to say to me? Because I need his amazing silence, his amazing acceptance, his patience. I need that. When do I need it? I don't need it in the springtime of life. I don't need Jesus to be silent when I'm running through the nice green hills and it's getting to be summer and we're at Bible camp or wherever it was that you would be at that has this picture. We don't need the winter Jesus. We don't need him to be silent. And we don't see him as being silent. We see the waves as belonging to him. We hear the birds and think they belong to him. No, we need this kind of Jesus when the cancer is not taken away. Period. And will never be taken away. Period. That's when we Jesus to say, I'm here and I'm silent. That's when we need him the most, don't we? When the recovery does not occur. And Jesus just says, I'm here and I am silent. The cross will happen. And Jesus says, I will be silent. I will not give up hope of something better, but I'm going to be silent. And so Jesus is giving us an indication of who he is. Call it being stoic in the face of winter, or I like calling it what it is, which is endurance or patience. This is what we learn about Jesus. Jesus stood with courage and faced the cross. He just said, this is where I'm going, and this is the way it'll be. Who is Jesus? Again, he could have called 10,000 angels, and he said, nope, I'm going to die alone. Do you know what each of us desperately needs? This is now the transition to us. That was our lesson. What do we learn about Jesus? He faces this with complete silence. He's like a lamb led to the slaughter, etc., etc. Let me tell you what we each desperately need in this world. We don't need a chipper, more promising Jesus. The world doesn't need a Jesus who answers all their prayers in the affirmative and makes life rosy. They think they do, but they don't. How many times have you heard people say it? I guarantee you in this moment, on this day, somebody somewhere has said these words. They have said, I was a Christian, I grew up in the church, but then my wife left me. I can't handle it. This God can't be real. He's a bad God because my wife left me. Period. Somebody's saying that today, out there somewhere. Somewhere out there, somebody is saying, I lost my job. I can't believe God would let that happen. I'm not going to believe in this God anymore. He's a bad God. See, they're not being silent, and they're not hearing from the silent God. They're not hearing from the enduring Jesus, and they're not learning from this Jesus in the wintertime in the lesson that we all need to hear. That's not what the world needs. The world doesn't need answers to their questions. They need somebody who will stand up and take courage. It's the most lacking thing in our culture. You know what we desperately need? Do you know what the politicians desperately need? We just wish one of them would have what? Courage. The teacher, the policeman, the politician, the grocery store clerk, the mechanic, every single one of them. All of them, we just want one thing, and it's the only thing you and I need, courage. Think about this text. The government officials, I guess I need to pull up the slides. The government official, Pilate, what does he do? He has no courage whatsoever. Oh, look, the mob's saying off with his head. All right, I'll give in for the sake of peace. He has no courage whatsoever to do what's right. The chief priests and rulers, they're weasels and traitors. They're not going to have any courage. The mob, they're completely they have no courage whatsoever, no convictions whatsoever. It's just to and fro. One day they're like, Hosanna, Hosanna in the highest, you're our king. The next day, crucify him, crucify him. The disciples, what kind of courage did they have? They thought they had courage until the moment when they're asked, do you believe in him? And Peter's like, I've never seen this man before in my life. Right? It's like they scatter. And so there's this, the characters, only Jesus here, he's like, okay, this is what it takes. At some point, the prayers are not answered the way I want them. At some point, the cross has to occur. At some point, tough choices must be made. And do you want the springtime Jesus, or do you want the courageous Jesus? Do you want the fluffy Santa Claus, or do you want somebody who will give you the strength and the ability to weather the winter? That takes courage. And so Mark 14, 1 through 12 comes along, because I forgot to mention the only courageous person in the text, except for Jesus. Outside of Jesus, there's only one person in all of chapter 14 who's courageous. Guess who you need to imitate? Of all the people in chapter 14, there's only one person you can imitate. You can't imitate Jesus. You can't go to the cross and die on the cross for everybody else's sins, so don't even think it. But there is one person you can imitate. Did you catch the contrast? It's chapter 14, starting in verse 1. Mark reminds us it's the Passover, and the unleavened bread was 2 days off, and the chief priests and the scribes were seeking how to kill him. And they were saying, well, let's don't do it during the festival because everybody will start rioting. And while he was in Bethany at the home of Simon the leper and reclining at the table, there came a woman with an alabaster vial of very costly perfume. She broke the vial, she poured it over his head. And of course, everybody started saying something. Like some were saying, why has this perfume been wasted? Others were saying, we could have sold this for a year's wages and given it to the poor. Another one, right? Doesn't she know that Jesus isn't worthy of that? Or who does this woman think she is? She could care less. It doesn't matter what any of them were thinking, because she's the one person in the room with courage. Of course, Jesus will pipe up because he can't help it. Let her alone. Stop bothering her. She's done a good deed for me. For the poor you'll always have, and I own everything in the universe anyway. He doesn't have to say all of this, but she has done what she could. She's anointed my body for the burial. Did you catch the contrast? The other disciples tell Jesus, no way are you going to the cross. No way are you going to do that. The Messiah doesn't do that. The woman understands winter. It's like she understood it. This is where he's going. How does she know? He said it like 100 times, and she must have listened. She must have somehow, in all the noise and all the stuff and all of what the disciples are saying, somewhere along the line, she looked and Jesus said, I am going to die on the cross and be buried. And she thought, he's going to die on the cross and be buried. And this is where they do it in Jerusalem. And she came to him and anoints his body for burial. Done. It's like she is the only one who has the courage to face the cross along with Jesus. Everybody else misunderstands. Everybody else doesn't accept it. Everybody else goes somewhere else. So how do you and I respond to Jesus? Number one, we've got to respond with courage. You and I need courage that when things don't go the way we think they should, we still praise the Lord, like this woman did. But not just that, we need to be, number two, I think, faithful in all the seasons of life. We need to be able to testify about Jesus when the sickness is not removed and the pain doesn't stop. So we need to be, again, like Jesus or like this woman who faces life with courage. Finally, number three, I think we need to do what we can, because that's exactly the words Jesus said about her. She did what she could. See, that's what courage leads us to do. We do what we can. Jesus didn't expect her to try to stop him, and she didn't. She couldn't have anyway. She can't stop the Romans from crucifying him. She can't stop Jesus from going through it. She can't stop these men from saying what they're saying. She can't keep the disciples all on board. She can't do a whole bunch of things. But she can do one thing, and she does it. So, that's our lesson. Oh, one last verse. I always like to skip over this verse. It's verse 28. Remember, in the text, we'll see it each week. Remember, verse 28 is coming. With that, let's stand and sing.